This is discussion 8B. All right, so I talked last time about how Christianity spread initially as an underground religion that was illegal and the Romans persecuted it. But in the 300s CE, Christianity became legal and that eventually became the official religion of the Roman Empire. And this profoundly changed the religion as a whole. First of all, the Emperor Diocletian in the late 200s and early 300s was a really powerful Roman emperor. I'll talk about him later in another lecture. But he carried out some really vicious persecutions of Christians. But when Diocletian retires, there's a civil war between two different Roman generals, Constantine and Galerius. And Constantine, just before the Battle of Milvian Bridge, he's about to fight Galerius to see who's going to become a Roman emperor. And Constantine sees this cross in the sky, and he takes it as a sign. He says, well, if I win this battle, it must mean the Christian God likes me, and so I will convert to Christianity. He wins the battle. Ends in 311, and so he in 313 he issues the Edict of Milan, which legalizes Christianity. Now he doesn't officially make Christianity the official religion of the Roman Empire, but he starts to do things to favor it, to make it flourish. And a couple of things that he does, he starts to give money to the Christian churches, and he starts to actually turn over Roman pagan temples to Christian churches and say you can make that a church. But one of the biggest things he does is in 325, he calls together a bunch of religious leaders from all over the Roman Empire, Christian leaders, and he says at Nicaea, the Council of Nicaea, and he says basically, you guys have got to get your story straight. You've got to figure out what Christian doctrine is. And in particular, there were a bunch of disputes going on between Christians about whether Jesus was God or human and all sorts of other things like that. And so the Council of Nicaea basically comes up with an orthodoxy. They say this is the right way to think about being Christian. And they come up with a set of things. And this meant that as a result of the Council of Nicaea, a lot of Christians now were called heretics. They had the wrong ideas, right? That hadn't happened before because there was no official right idea. Now there is. Also, at about this time in the 300s, you get the standardization of the Bible. I mentioned last time there are all these gospels circulating, and there are all these different writings about Jesus circulating, and often they had very different philosophical ideas about Jesus and about Christianity. And so at this time, you see the gradual standardization of the Bible, that they start saying this stuff does not belong, is not right, and it's not good writing, and we're going to get rid of that. And so the Gospel of Thomas is out, and the Edgerton Gospel is out, and the Gospel Q, and actually that was out earlier, but and then these are the things that are going to be in the Bible, especially the New Testament. We're going to have Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. We're going to have the letters of Paul, etc. So the Bible gets standardized, especially the New Testament gets standardized in the beginning in the 300s. It's a gradual process, but it's in 300. The early 300s is the first time we actually have somebody say, "Here are the books of the Bible," and it's the books that we now have in the Bible, right? And then over the course of Constantine himself didn't actually convert to Christianity until he was on his deathbed. But in the centuries after Constantine, the Roman Empire, some emperors would try to get rid of Christianity, but most embraced Christianity, and Christianity gradually becomes the official religion of the Roman Empire. This has some enormous implications for the religion. First of all, as I mentioned, there's now there's an orthodoxy, there's a standard set of Christian beliefs. But even more so, the Roman government eventually makes Christianity a part of the Roman government, and they create a bureaucracy for the church. They basically say, well, we've broken the Roman government up into provinces, which are kind of like states, and we have a governor of a province. So why don't we give each province also a religious leader? We'll call him a bishop, right? And then we'll break those provinces up into sub-districts. And so basically, they took the divisions of the Roman government, provinces and districts, etc., and they made that the church set of divisions also, and they basically installed bureaucrats, just like they installed governors in each province. They installed bishops in each bishopric or diocese, and they give them salaries, and they basically make it a branch of the government. And this makes the church a really powerful organization, because the Roman government is really a big bureaucracy and a very well-organized bureaucratic machine, and now the church has this well-organized bureaucracy, right? A second big thing that comes out of this is that there's a massive number of converts to Christianity. Before Constantine, to be a Christian, you really had to put your life on the line. You were risking death. After Constantine legalizes it, lots of people who wouldn't have become Christians earlier can now become Christians, and Christianity becomes a sort of a no-cost option. You can just become a Christian. But this means that a lot of people are joining the Christian religion, not because they profoundly believe it, but just because it's the official religion of their own government. In fact, you start to see people becoming Christians and just to get a position in the church because they want a nice job with a government paycheck, right? And so this begins to change the religion also. And finally, I want to talk about this changing emphasis. The Roman Empire, under the early Christians were kind of radical. They're like, renounce all wealth, forget about the material world and focus on the spiritual. And this is a pretty radical vision. And they were egalitarian. All Christians are equal before God. This is a pretty radical message. And when Christianity gets into the Roman Empire and the Roman government adopts it, that message starts to shift slowly. And by the end of the Roman Empire and then into the Middle Ages, you're going to see Christianity gradually shift slightly. And you start to see an emphasis less on equality and more on God has a moral vision for how the world should be organized. And it involves some hierarchies and some patriarchy and things like that. And so the radical egalitarianism of the early church gives way to some more hierarchical vision of Christianity. And then you start to see a greater focus on social order, and you start to see a greater focus on running society efficiently. And so Christianity gradually transforms from being sort of a radical religion of personal liberation to being a more stabilizing religion like some of the other religions that we've talked about. And by the Middle Ages, when we get there, I'll talk about that, Christianity is an extremely stabilizing religion as it's conceived of in the Middle Ages. So Christianity shifts considerably over the course of its early existence. I want to talk about one minor side thing, and this is, just take a minute. I know I've talked way too much today, but I want to talk about Manicheanism. There's one other religion that emerges in the 200s, and this is Manicheanism. Manicheanism is named after a Persian religious leader named Mani, who lived from 216 to 274 or 277 CE. There's some dispute about the date of his death. Mani was from Mesopotamia, modern-day Iraq, but because of all the trade networks, and I'll talk about trade on Friday, because of all the trade networks, Mani was exposed to lots of different religions: Zoroastrianism, Buddhism, Christianity, Judaism, Hinduism, and Jainism. And Mani decided that he looked at this and he said, you know what? I think all these religions, they have a lot of things in common. They all tend to say that it's important to focus on the spiritual things, not on material wealth, or at least most of them say that. And they all say be moral and don't be greedy and don't be concerned about getting rich or famous. They all try to control sexuality, don't have wild sex all over the place. And Mani said, you know what? I think there's a central message here. And he said, I think if you take all the religions of the world and put them all together, you can come up with a really clear central message, which is embrace the spiritual and reject the physical. And Mani then came up with an elaboration, a story that basically the God that created the universe was a spiritual being, but he created a demiurge or a god, a sort of physical god, and told him to create the physical world. And the demiurge created the physical world, and he thought he was the God of that world. And that is the God of the Old Testament for Judaism and Christianity. But the spiritual God realized that was a bad idea, and so he sent people like Jesus and Buddha to convince people to reject being concerned about the physical world and just embrace the spiritual. And so human beings, Mani says, are physical beings, but we're actually souls that are stuck in physical bodies. And so there's a conflict within human beings between the physical and the spiritual. And Siddhartha Gautama and the Buddha and Jesus, they all say reject the physical and embrace the spiritual. And so that's the real message of this spiritual God, and human beings should do that. And so Manicheanism had this sort of extreme black and white, and they probably took that black and white from Zoroastrianism, this idea that there's good and there's evil. There's the spiritual and there's the physical. There's light and there's darkness, and it's all black and white. And so you have to embrace the spiritual and reject the physical. So you have to not have sex, and you don't have any possessions, and eventually you want to be like the Jains and reject all eating and everything. So Manicheans sort of see this as their religion, and they think that they're the logical successor religion to Buddhism, Christianity, Zoroastrianism, Judaism, all of it. Manicheanism would become really popular in the 300s. It would spread along the Silk Roads, which I'll talk about on Friday. And it would last until probably the 800s. In China was one of the last places with significant Manichean populations. Under the Roman Empire, the Manicheans were basically outlawed. Once Christianity became the official religion, they saw Manicheanism as a threat, and so Manicheanism was outlawed in the Roman Empire. And Christianity basically pushed Manicheanism aside. But I just want to mention Manicheanism in passing, because we really see this enormous ferment of new religions during the classical era. And there's a lot of variety here, but there are some central themes that come out too. So we need to pay attention to religion because it has enormous impacts on the societies we're studying.